Welcome to Open BXRx on BronxNet. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, inviting you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter, and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. As we saw in primary elections back in June, Election Day is looking a little bit different in 2020 due to COVID-19. Though voters will still be able to go to the polls here in New York, a record number of people are expected to vote from home by mail-in in November. Here to help us learn more about absentee ballots, mail-in voting, online registration, and keep track of important deadlines is Sabrina Castillo, Director of Partnership and Outreach at the NYC Campaign Finance Board. Sabrina, thank you so much for joining us today.
How are you? Thank you so much for having me and allowing us to share this really important information in a really critical time right now as we are right there almost at the election.
Yes, we are. We are fastly approaching, and this information is super important, so thank you. Just for people who are not familiar, can you tell us about NYC Votes and your mission?
Yeah, so NYC Votes is a voter empowerment initiative of the New York City Campaign Finance Board. We provide voters with tools and knowledge that they need to be able to build their own political power, especially focus on voters in underrepresented communities at the polls. This means that we are hyper-focused on young voters and new citizens. We understand that voters who are consistently voting, come from a voting culture, are already receiving a lot of information. And so while our information is general information that is useful for everyone, we do have programming that focuses on young and new citizens across the city.
Right. Thank you so much for the background, Sabrina. And just to get right into it, how has COVID-19 affected voters this year?
Well, I think the pandemic has changed New Yorkers in many ways. I think it's changed the country in many ways, but the way that we vote has changed significantly. There are a lot of changes that were already happening. The first time that we were able to early vote was last year. And safety of voting is now of the utmost importance. And thankfully, there are several ways for New Yorkers to be able to vote. Absentee is one of them. Previously, that was not an option unless you were out of the city or there were other excused absences that you can have. So now it is open to anyone that wants to vote via absentee. You can go to nycabsentee.com. And while you can request a mail-in ballot right now, it is important to note that the Board of Elections will be sending out ballots to voters at the end of this month. And the earlier you do that, the better it is, generally speaking, as you prepare. And the way that I have been talking about this with people and the way our team has been talking about with the community is to make a plan on how you intend to vote, because you can request your absentee ballot. You can also now drop it off at a poll site during working operation hours, but we also have early voting. And that is another option where you can practice social distancing and be able to vote early. And the second piece of this is how to prepare and make sure that you're eligible, and you have until October 9th to register to vote. Make sure that you're eligible to participate in this year's election. So overall, I think safety is the biggest question that was brought into the voting conversation, where previously that may have not been the case.
Right. Thank you for that, Sabrina. And are there any new voting laws that we should know of during this time?
Yeah, so there's some that are relatively new, and then there's some that I said that I think are just new to the experience of voting. Early voting being the first one. Last year was the first time that New York State was able to vote early, 10 days before the election day. So this year, we are able to vote early, and also the ability to be able to request an absentee ballot is also new. So you can, again, request it at nycabsentee.com. And there's also a tracking mechanism now where voters can now check their absentee ballot application. And I think that this really hits home for those who have concerns about the reliability of voting by mail. And this is going to be just another way to be able to be transparent through this process. And there are changes happening literally by the minute. Back in March, it felt like it was happening by the minute. I think we've gotten the hang of it. But on our website at nyccfb.info/coronavirus, we update any new laws that come into place that might not really be received in the public as quickly as we wanted to. So we always encourage people to really stay up to date. And our Twitter and Instagram is also updating any new procedures, laws, or anything that's going to make it more accessible for New Yorkers to vote.
Right. And Sabrina, on mail-in voting, should we feel confident about voting through mail, especially with what's going on with the USPS and everything?
Yeah, so there are some things that, you know, we don't have control over when it comes to specifically USPS and all of that. But I will say this much. There are several states who have all voting by mail operations and have been voting by mail for a very long time. And I think that on the voting and election side, and the administrators and organizations like ourselves are working really hard to be able to make sure that this is a transparent and safe process. So if there is any doubt, you should request your absentee ballot as soon as possible. You can drop it off at a poll site. If you change your mind and you got your absentee, you can go in and vote early starting October 24th. So there are Saturdays, there's evening hours. So at any point, if you have any questions, I think that as a city, we've really responded well in just being able to create as many opportunities that are accessible.
And Sabrina, NYC Votes shared that since 2016, voter registration has dropped 49% in New York City. Here in the Bronx, voter registration has dropped 59% from 2016. What is the reason for this, and how can we change this in our borough?
Yeah, so I think online voter registration is something that we were not able to have as accessible as we would want it to have. And New York City, as you know, the way that we move through the city is through connection and communities, and to be able to participate in many of the events that happen throughout the city. So I think that that's been the biggest impact, not being able to organize out in the field and do the type of organization around field outreach that we've done, events, voter registration events at libraries and at schools. We used to have student voter registration day where we went into every single high school and registered students. So there is just a lot of ways that we have changed, and it's really important for us to know that for this presidential election, the type of increase we would normally see when first-time voters are very excited about voting, we haven't been seeing that because of the accessibility that the pandemic has caused. And the pandemic did cause us to close down those type of operations when it comes to field organizing in the way that we would want to. Particularly in the Bronx, we do know we have higher rates of foreign-born naturalized citizens, and what we're really trying to do is make sure that we're creating innovative ways to be able to communicate and work with community-based organizations to look deeper into that, for that we can understand what is the best way to connect with those communities, what is the best way to provide that. And we have on the youth side been able to implement an ambassador program where we have students from the Bronx that are talking to their peers. We're launching a peer-to-peer campaign where they can text their peers, they can invite them in to register to vote and become part of the process. A lot of that has probably been one of our biggest challenges, is just not having them, you know, boots on the ground, like they say.
Right. And Sabrina, of course, we have the important presidential election to worry about this upcoming season, but we also have state and local elections. How can people get information and resources through NYC Votes about their districts and what elections are going on there?
Yeah, so the presidential election, I think, is the biggest headline. And I think as New Yorkers, that's what people tend to focus on. It's what the news is focusing on. But there is local elections. And also, one of the reasons why we really focus on first-time voters being able to participate in the presidential elections, because you're also more likely to come back during local elections. And next year, we'll have a municipal election. We'll have a new mayor, controller, public advocate, and there's going to be over 500 people running for office. So we understand that if people don't participate in the presidential election, they're less likely to come back. And there is a big drop-off already, even with those who do vote in the presidential election. So when you're voting this year for the presidential election, being focused on those state races are really important, because it gets you into that habit and changing the way that you look at the ballot. And we produce a voter guide. So you can go to voting.nyc and you can see all of the races that are there. We produce the official voter guide for the city of New York for municipal elections, and we include all of the seats that are available on the ballot there.
Thank you so much, Sabrina, for your time today. Folks can also check you out on Instagram, right? Social media is very engaging for voting engagement, super important in the digital sphere that we're in now.
Yes, I would say that our Twitter and our Instagram at NYC Votes is very active in not only giving you the tools and the resources, but also giving you up-to-date information as any changes that are happening. We saw that happening a lot as we were heading into the primary. And while I think we are in a good place, we don't really know what to anticipate. So it's always good to keep track of that and check out voting.nyc for any information that you might need. October 9th is the voter registration deadline, so make sure that you're registered by then, and you can start early voting October 24th. And the most important information that you want to remember is October 27th is the last day to request your voting by absentee. And so you want to make sure you get that in as early as possible, because the earlier you get it, the more time you have to be able to fill it out and be able to drop it off at the poll site or at the post office, whatever you feel most comfortable with.
Thank you again, Sabrina, for your time today and for all this wealth of information for our viewers.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Again, folks, just to recap those important dates that Sabrina just gave, the deadline for voter registration is October 9th. Early voting begins October 24th to November 1st. And the deadline to apply for an absentee ballot is October 27th online and November 2nd in person. Those absentee ballots must be postmarked or dropped off in person by Election Day, November 3rd. Please visit nycvotes.org and follow them on social media at NYC Votes for more information. We'll be right back.